What's going on, everybody? This is Sean of Raw Select Music, and today I've got another record recommendation video for you. I've got these 7 records to talk about before I close out the year, talking about my favorites and runners up for 2020. But because these 3 guys right here, I still want to give a little bit more time to sort of solidify my thoughts and opinions on them. So I'm going to make this into a 2-part video. I'm going to save these records for next week. And today, I'm going to talk about these 4 guys right here. I've been listening to them quite a bit as of late, and as such I wanted to share my thoughts and opinions of them with you and let you know why I think these 4 records are definitely worth checking out. So with that being said, let's talk about these guys. Talk about 13, the compilation that Fat Beats put out to mark the end of their Baker's Dozen series. Now, I haven't been a huge collector of the Baker's Dozen series, largely because they're in such limited quantities, and getting a hold of the ones that I really want, like Buddha Monk, DiBiase, Eloquent, have largely become impossible through any other means other than Discogs. But this one was readily available, and with a lot of big names on it like Madlib, Pete Rock, Toki Monster, Alchemist, Black Milk, Mind Design, Blockhead, Onra, Static Selector, Dejavu, The Fudge Monk, Kudma, Flow Fills, and Mitsu the Beats. I mean, I figured I might as well check it out because there's got to be at least some good beats on here. And sure enough, there's definitely a lot of really good beats on here. I'm kind of surprised at the amount of moodier tracks on here. There's definitely sort of a dark, menacing through line with a lot of the tracks on here. Kicking off with the more boom bap-like sounds of the Dejavu the Fudge Monk track and its really brooding atmosphere over some very old school sounding, yet very much different from just straight up boom bap style loops, is a great way to kick off the record, and it moves in quite nicely into the off-kilter cinematic sounds of Blockhead's track on here. And I gotta say, through my many listen-throughs of this record, there really isn't a weak track on here. There are definitely some beats that I wish were a lot longer. Specifically, as expected, Madlib's track barely clocks in at a minute, and half of it is the intro sample before it actually gets into the beat. And it really is a shame because it's top-tier Madlib with his typical signature looped up samples with an absolute unbelievable feel and texture to them. That's pretty much all he does now, yet it absolutely works for him. And it absolutely works for me. It's just the problem that anytime that you get an instrumental from Madlib these days, it feels like it's way too short. And it doesn't really work as a listening track, and it's too short to use it in any sort of DJ set unless you're working at an extremely frantic pace. But I'd say overall, this record basically runs the gamut from good to excellent. I was quite surprised that upon my initial listen to the Pete Rock track on here, I didn't really like it. It just felt so loose and kind of lazy, and it just felt like Pete Rock not really trying. Yet over time, it's actually become one of my favorite tracks on here. There's just a vibe and a mood and an atmosphere to the really loose sample, the way that the drums and the sample are almost clashing against each other, and it just creates a level of funk that over time, after my ears sort of got accustomed to it, it really did become one of my favorite tracks on here. Static Selected turns in a really cool beat as well that has that menacing atmosphere that I was talking about. Kutma's track is by far the heaviest hitting track on here and absolutely makes for one of the biggest head nod tracks on here. Flow Fills turns in, as per his style, one of the better straight up jazz-based loop instrumental hip-hop tracks on here. And Mitsu the Beats track, much like the Madlib one, is criminally short but still really dope with its very easily recognizable sample. But the swing that he puts on that track is absolutely absolutely incredible and really just adds to the groove and the funk of the song. Overall, I don't really know what else to say about it. It is an absolutely solid collection of beats, and if this is the record that Fat Beats has decided that they're going to go out on with their Baker's Dozen series, they could have done way worse than this, and quite honestly, this is one of the better instrumental hip-hop releases that I've heard this year. If you haven't checked out Fat Beats' Baker's Dozen 13, highly recommend it. Definitely give it a listen. Pick it up on vinyl, pick it up digitally. Definitely let this one grace your ears, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Up is a record that actually I've had for a long time in digital form. Full disclosure, Mark to Clive-Lowe hit me up through an email and sent me a digital copy of this album before the vinyl came out, and I gotta say big thanks and huge shout outs to Mark to Clive-Lowe for doing that. I will get back to you on the Patreon thing. I feel so terrible about that. At some point in the future, I will be setting up a Patreon. I just haven't done it yet, so I hope my proof of purchase, I wasn't going to take advantage of getting the album from you. I was definitely still going to show my support. So many thanks for that. And yeah, I will definitely show my support in other ways in the future. But that little disclaimer out of the way, Dreamweavers is a very, very, very solid modern jazz record. I originally said that it feels like a little bit of a companion piece to last year's Heritage Parts 1 and 2, and I don't think that's quite accurate. The Heritage tracks were very, very fluid and very natural in their approach to composition, and for the most part, most of the tracks on that album had a very monumentous and very adventurous and very journey-like approach to them, very epic in nature, and that is absolutely not the case with this album at all. Texturally, it is comparable in some ways, maybe in sort of melodics and just maybe aesthetics. But in general, this is definitely a project that separates itself from his previous work in that it is just a straight up good time jazz album with tons of grooves. It's much more immediate than the Heritage albums, where a lot of those tracks were slow burners and took a long time for them to sort of coalesce and come together in what message that they were trying to get across. The tracks on here come out swinging, and they are very, very enjoyable to listen to. Everybody is in top form. Mark to Clive-Lowe comes in with his signature beautiful, lyrical, spiritual keyboard and piano playing, has some very lovely and very enjoyable melodies and improv, and his backing musicians in Andrea Lombardini and Tommaso, I'm not going to try to pronounce that. Hopefully that'll focus. All do an excellent job of keeping up with them. And I gotta say, in comparison to the jazz album that I'll be talking about in my next video, this is the absolute antithesis to that album. Whereas that album is way more experimental, this one is way more upfront, very easy to listen to, and ultimately just a really enjoyable record. Pretty much from front to back, there isn't a track on here that I dislike, and I love the variety of genres that they tackle on here, whether it's straight up jazz, funk, more electronic music focused stuff, little bits of broken beat with live instrumentation, and some of the more meditative tracks, like the title track Dreamweavers, is one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've heard this year. I'd say ultimately it doesn't stick out in my mind nearly as much as the Heritage project did, but that still doesn't take away from what is a very, very enjoyable modern jazz project, and definitely a highly, highly recommended album. If you haven't heard anything from Mark to Clive-Lowe, make sure you do so. But if you're looking for a great point of entry to get into Mark to Clive-Lowe's music, his project Dreamweavers is definitely highly recommended from me. a record that actually digitally came out in 2018, but it got a vinyl release this year. And it was an album that I was sort of mildly anticipating because of the name attached to it, seeing as how I'm a huge fan of Bad Bad Not Good. I knew, regardless of its quality, I was going to have to check out Matt Tavares' project Matty, Dejavu, released on Mr. Bongo this year. And originally, I didn't think much of this project. I thought it was kind of cool. I liked some of the keyboard elements. I think Matt is a perfectly fine vocalist, and overall just found it a fairly pleasant listen. And then over time, as a lot of the melodies started to sink in, as a lot of the hooks started to grab me, as well as just some of the musicianship that was going on here, and finally accepting that this is not a jazz project, but more like a pop psychedelic record, I actually started really falling in love with this record. And I gotta say, Matty's Dejavu has definitely become one of the most listened to records in the last month or so. Some of Tavares' biting lyrics are some of the most memorable that I've heard in years. The textures that he creates, whether it's with his punchy drums and the sort of sweeping keys that he throws in here, as well as there being some really cool grooves on here. This is actually a far more compelling record than I originally anticipated. The arrangements on it are good. Matt shows off that he's a very, very skilled songwriter, and he's just as capable at being a jazz musician as he is at being a pop musician. As I said before, some of the vocal and musical hooks are really, really strong on this record, and I'm not really sure what else to say. I think this one's not going to be for everyone, but I'd still recommend that everybody give it a listen. The only real track on here that really didn't do anything for me was the title track. Dejavu is the longest song on here, and it really just doesn't have enough interesting ideas going on it to warrant being the longest song on the record. That being said, the opener track on here, Embarrassed, has become one of my favorite songs of the year. I'll Gladly Place Myself Below You is an absolutely fantastic song that's just absolutely gorgeous. And everything between the opener and Dejavu, I gotta say, is absolutely fantastic. So if you haven't given this sort of low-key record a listen, highly recommend that at the very least, maybe not pick it up on vinyl, but definitely give it a listen digitally. I'm certainly happy that I added this to the collection, and I think you will be. I think you will be too if you give this guy a shot. A record that, had it actually come out in 2020, I probably would put it in my number one slot for this year, bar none. This is the best music I've heard in a long time. It blows everything else that I've heard out of the water. Just one problem. This album actually came out in 2018. It was just issued on vinyl this year. And it really pains me to say this because everyone, if you're watching this video right now, and if you've made it this far, based on my metrics, probably hasn't happened. But if you have made it this far, this is the best piece of music I have heard probably in the last 5 years. Undoubtedly, music for saxophone and bass guitar from Sam Gendel and Sam Wilkes is one of the finest albums I've listened to ever. I am gonna go back to this thing probably 5-10 years from now, if YouTube is still a thing, and review it, and I guarantee you I will be just in love with this record as I am right now. Simply put, this is the most creative, innovative, enrapturing, engulfing, enveloping record I've heard probably since I gushed about the Leon Vynehall Nothing Is Still record, which coincidentally has fallen quite a bit in my opinion. It's an okay record, but it is nothing compared to this. The sheer ingenuity, creativity pouring from every second of this record is just absolutely astounding. And the fact that the majority of it is done between Sam Gendel's saxophone and Sam Wilkes' bass with a little bit of assistance from some added percussion and electronics just makes it one of the most brilliant pieces of music I've heard in years. Just on concept alone, you should give this record a listen. But listening to the actual music, you should totally give this record a listen. From front to back, every single track on here has something brilliant going on. From the absolutely entrancing ambience of the opener boa, theme and variations with Wilkes and Gendel doing Flying Lotus, then Flying Lotus is done in probably 6 years. Every single minute on this record is an absolutely beautiful mix of ambience, jazz, hip-hop, and basically everything that I love about music. I cannot stress this enough. It's creative, it's unique, it's innovative, and it's done in a way where it doesn't feel like academic experimentation. It's actually an extremely compelling record to listen to. I absolutely cannot recommend this album enough. If you haven't heard this, you are missing out on what is easily one of the most creative records probably in the last 5 to 10 years. If you sleep on this, you're doing yourself a disservice. Music for saxophone and bass guitar gets my absolute highest recommendation. Buy 2 copies of it. Buy them for yourself. Buy them for somebody you like. Buy it for someone you don't like. Doesn't matter. Get this record. Support it so more people will be inspired to make music like this. This is what we need. Not more cookie cutter bullshit. More of this. Okay, I'm done. So that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thanks as always for watching. If you've checked out any of these records, please let me know what you thought about them down in the comments. If you want to hear any of these records for yourself, please head over to my WordPress blog, because that's where I'll be posting music links to any of the music that I talk about on this channel. Also, make sure you head over to my Mixcloud, where you can check out Raw Select Radio, the audio component of this YouTube channel, and as well make sure that you're here at 8 p.m. Japan Standard Time, so that way you can check out Live from the Record Room, where I play records like the ones that I talk about in these videos, as well as some of the records that are in my collection that I don't get a chance to talk about on this channel. Links to everything, as always, down in the description. So that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thanks, as always, for watching, and I will catch you in the next video. So until then, peace out!